everyone, to another episode of the FIBA on Risk and Compliance Excellence, the F.O.R.C.E podcast. Today's topic is the talent evolution, skills the compliance professional of 2030 needs today. And it's a very interesting title, right? Skills the compliance professional of 2030 needs today. And the reason for that is the world is rapidly evolving. And so is the skill set needed to succeed in today's environment. Innovation is involved and in the form of artificial intelligence impacting every industry that we have today. There's concerns that if I don't understand these new technologies, particularly artificial intelligence, that I will be left behind or that my job will be eliminated. Well, we're here to tell you that's not necessarily the case. So to do that, we have brought in two people who are very dear to my heart because they are important members of our NextGen committee here at FIBA. So we have Janiell Gonzalez, who's an associate at the law firm Greenberg, Traurig, and she is also the chair of our NextGen committee, and Michael Laffont, manager of risk advisory services at Kaufman Rossin, and the chair of our NextGen advisory board. So, Janiell, Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, David. We're happy to be here and definitely excited to have this first series.
And this is important. And as Janiell said, first series. FIBA has a mission. And this mission is to have more young professionals involved, not just involved in our committee structure, as they both are, but involved in education, involved in decision-making, involved in professional development. Because, as I mentioned at the start, this is going to be the key to anybody succeeding, not just in 2030, but starting today, because you need to start now. It's similar to, we're in 2026 now. Probably about 9 years ago, I stood on the stage of our AML conference and told the audience, innovate or die. And we're seeing that become a reality. Competition is stronger. So, as always, we go ladies first. So, Janiell, let's take a step back. So you became a lawyer. That was the path that you chose. So what was the skill set? And let's go prior to your law school. What was the skill set that you developed that you thought would help you along this road to becoming a lawyer?
Well, before becoming a lawyer and getting into law school, I was actually a paralegal for about a decade. And the reason I did that was I wanted to kind of understand how legal teams work and whether or not like the legal trajectory was for me. And I did get to a point where I finally realized I really loved being a part of the legal department. I was an in-house role before, and then I decided, okay, law school might be for me. So I decided to go to law school. But one of the skills that I had to develop in kind of getting into that role and being prepared is really just being able to dedicate time and time efficiency, but also reading and understanding and interpreting, obviously, laws and regulations. And then beyond that, giving practical advice, which is, okay, now I've read this regulation, but what does it mean to the client, to the business, and what do they need to know in order to then be able to basically launch products in a regulatory environment and without triggering things along the way, right? So I think that's kind of an important skill set is not only can you interpret the law, but can you give practical advice and guidance to your client or your counterparty to be able to implement that in a practical way.
And as a lawyer by profession, or by training, I should say, not by profession, I understand exactly what you're saying. So, Michael, what was the skill set that you chose to develop for your path into risk advisory services?
Thank you, David. Thank you, Janiell. It's great to be here with you guys. I think that my biggest skill that I had to learn from an early stage was being adaptable. Um, I went from early in my career working within the branch operations department to quickly moving into BSA and compliance roles. From there, you kind of had to be adaptable in the sense of you had to go to different areas and build your expertise from there. So I worked in KYC, transaction monitoring, SAR investigations, basically wherever I was needed. It's very similar to consulting. Risk advisory is very similar. The engagements aren't always the same. You have to be adaptable to what the projects are being thrown at you.
It's interesting you talk about that. And this is something, and I always laugh and say, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, which is when I started my career, that they used to call cross training. So you would start in a bank and you would do that. You would move amongst the different departments to understand the big picture of how the operation actually took place. Now, we didn't work in silos. We understood what each other's job was, which was better for the client at the end of the day and better for efficiency and functionality of the institution. So both of you advise clients. Both of you advise banking clients, fintech clients in particular, in the areas that Michael just mentioned, which are the most challenging ones that we face today, right? BSA, AML, sanctions. These are the ones where we are challenged. So, Janiell, the skill set, because we're in a rapidly changing environment, particularly in the new administration. Rules, regulations, guidance change so fast that it's a challenge to keep up. So what's the skill that you have? Because I'll say it, you're obviously doing very well. You've come along a great path, but what are the skill sets that you now need to face this new environment?
I guess from a legal professional perspective, I think one of the critical components of being agile in this space is understanding your regulatory landscape and being able to track and monitor trends and guidance from FinCEN, regulatory authorities, the IRS examinations, enforcement actions. A lot of the times you can read a regulation, and unfortunately, there's terms within the regulation that are not defined. They could be interpreted different ways. And so, a lot of the times for us, we just need to be on our quote unquote tippy toes when it comes to that guidance, right? So, for example, today FinCEN just posted guidance on a new reporting rule. And so now it's like, okay, let's read that rule, let's interpret it, and then practically speaking, what does that mean for those individuals that now have a reporting requirement under the BSA, right? And then in the same instance, right, there's always guidance going out from other professionals. I think that's another critical component of the practice is we're looking at what other people are saying, other articles, other law firm articles, and even industry participants that are commenting on the rulemaking, et cetera. And then all of that kind of bleeds back into kind of the interpretation of that regulation. So I think for a legal professional, I think it's critical to kind of stay on top of everything that's going on in terms of regulatory changes, notice of proposed rulemaking, interpretations, enforcement actions. And then how do you do all that? Because that seems like a lot, right? And a lot of the times you can, and I'll just bring this up because I know it's going to be a topic, but you can leverage AI, right? You can now, we're in a place where you can dump all of these interpretive rules, notice of proposed rulemaking, which sometimes are 100 pages long, right? I'm not saying you shouldn't read it all, but you can leverage AI to kind of give you a summary and some of the critical components of that so that you can, again, stay on top of it and not necessarily be the specialist in the area, but at least kind of understand, okay, generally speaking, this is what that regulation's about, this is the reporting requirements, et cetera. So I think leveraging AI in this time and for 2030, which getting prepared for this podcast, I said 2030, my God, that's 4 years from now. That's actually not that long from today. But yeah, I think AI is a critical component of the skill set that you're gonna need in 2030 and today.
Well, we'll get to the issue of AI, and
Yeah.
I, as you know, I have my opinions on that.
Yes.
And yes, 2030 now is 4 years away. However, there are some quote unquote futurists, as they call themselves, that have been targeting 2030 as a critical date when perhaps all of this technology will be in use and will be relied upon, and what's going to happen to everybody's jobs, right? That's why 2030 has been used as such a targeted date. But before we get there, so Michael, time management sounds like a big key here, especially for young parents who have young children. And not only do they have their, we won't even call it 9 to 5 job to keep up with all of this, but other responsibilities. So, how do you strike that balance?
I mean, these days, time management, I don't even know what time it is right now, barely. It's been a very rewarding experience, but yeah, as life goes on, more challenges, more responsibilities fall into your lap. Luckily, with my current role, I'm kind of used to bouncing from project to project throughout the day, throughout the week. So it's kind of just, it's expanding after that 9 to 5, right? So you have to find the balance between your personal life and your work life, and just you make it work. But yeah, I think, leveraging tools like Janiell was saying, AI, it might, later on, it might make a lot of processes more efficient that will actually reward you some more time to focus on other tasks that would have taken you a little bit longer originally.
No, and of course, that balance, as you mentioned, for especially young parents, requires a good partnership, because there, and I say partnership because a marriage is a partnership, and it requires a balance because perhaps your partner is working also. So, you have to have that work-life balance. And that's something that the younger generation has always pushed for, is the work-life balance, that we just can't all be about work. But of course, you have to have, the mindset to be able to work. And that can be a challenge if you're challenged in the workplace, but you're also challenged at home. So, all right, you all brought it up. I know it's your favorite. You're both smiling. Artificial intelligence. So let's get into it. I agree it's a tool. It's a good tool. It can summarize things. It can analyze a lot of data and hopefully just put it all into a brief summary format. I mean, look, we're using Zoom. Zoom has AI note taking at the same time. So you want to use it. You want it to help you. Can you trust it? Janiell?
So I have a very common phrase I use on a daily basis, which is trust but verify. And
We're not
every
old enough for trust but verify. That's Ronald Reagan when he was president.
I love that phrase because I think in the context of AI, that's exactly how I operate. I will trust it to a certain degree, but I always verify. I have come across multiple instances where I'm, leveraging AI and it will, quote something in a regulation and I'm looking for it in the regulation and it's not even there. So you have to be extremely, extremely careful when it comes to using AI, in particular when with respect to, providing legal advice. But outside of that, I think even, compliance officers that are leveraging AI, number one, have to be almost like data specialists, right? Because you have to challenge what the data it's using and how like there could be biases that the AI software is implementing without you even knowing, right? So you have to number one like understand how the AI algorithm is working, and it's almost like this intersection where like compliance officers today almost have to be quote unquote bilingual or maybe even trilingual. You have to know the regulation, you have to know the technology, and then you also have to know your business, right? And how to, practically speaking, implement and use AI as a tool that you can then, provide practical, real life like outcomes, right? So it's outcome driven to your business. So I think, again, AI, it's a great tool. I think there's still many things that need to be corrected so before we can, anyone can just blindly rely on it. I don't think it's going to replace, you're going to always need human intervention. I think there's just no point, I think, ever where you're just going to blindly rely on AI to do things, especially in the compliance, like regulatory compliance space.
So, Michael, Janiell just made my point, which I think is fantastic. Trust but verify. So here's the question. So if it's trust but verify, how is that time management? Because now sounds like I'm taking twice the amount of time because I'm going to use the AI tool, but then I'm going to go back and check that the AI tool is accurate. So tell us.
It is. It is, and I think, definitely the goal of AI is to make your processes more efficient. However, there are certain areas that you want to take your time and make sure that everything is in place, especially when you're dealing with something like AI. We're seeing a lot of clients integrate AI in, areas like transaction monitoring and client onboarding. Those are very important areas that, if not treated correctly, they can have some serious implications. So I don't think AI is something that you can kind of set and forget. I think it's something that you have to really have some technical expertise about, have some knowledge, which goes back to my original point of being able to be adaptable. You want to be well versed in not only the regulations and the controls that you have to have in place, but how that AI system is operating as well. Um, and I think yeah.
Well, I'm glad we're all on the same page because, as you'll hear in a few weeks, I'll probably be on stage and say something about that. Now, understand though that I had the very first, they weren't called Macs back then. It was called an Apple IIc, actually, desktop, so that I could learn about that was the big innovation, right? That was from typewriters to an actual computer that could process information in a much more efficient and faster manner. Now we're talking about it actually thinking for us in a sense. So we're not there yet. I know we're getting there, but Janiell, tell us, so how did you come to learn and understand what AI is and how it works?
Well, for me, I think it's almost, I think probably the reality of anyone else, like everyone's talking about it, right? And so at some point, your curiosity just sparks and you're like, okay, well, what is this? So I think for most people, we all probably started with ChatGPT or some other version. I think now we have Grok, we have all these other tools, right? So then it kind of becomes a question of like which one to use. But I think generally, just generally speaking, I think using AI responsibly it's really primarily it's based on the person inputting, right, the data. And I think the more pinpointed you are and strategic you are about what you input, the better the outcome. And one of the great things about AI is that you can input something very broad in general, and then as you're kind of diving deeper into the issue, you can kind of narrow it and become more and fine tune the outcome further. I think where a lot of people probably don't, I guess the issue most people probably encounter is the fact that they don't like fine tune the input, right? And I think there's now CLEs on and like a bunch of educational tools on how to fine tune the input so that your outcome is the outcome or the response is exactly what you needed. But I think, yeah, generally it was just something that everyone kept talking about, including for training purposes for associates at our firm. It's, use AI, it's there, and if other people are doing it, you probably should be doing it as well, right? And I think it's almost to the point where clients expect it because they generally want you to be more efficient. And so, to your point, David, whether or not is it efficient if I'm using it, but I have to verify? Well, it probably would have taken me a little bit longer to find the specific regulation on point for a particular issue. AI just gives that to me. I check to make sure it's the right one, but just the checking, I think, doesn't probably take as long as if I were to just go through and having to research where it is that the regulation is that governs or applies in a particular issue. And then I think the other component is I can go beyond that and say, well, what are other people saying about this? And then it'll kind of do the research on that end. And then I can also fine tune my review of the research where I'm not reviewing, 1,000 different things, but maybe I'm reviewing five because I know it's relevant based on the AI output or outcome. So I think there is an efficiency component. But again, the human element I think is critical both from the input perspective and the output as well. You have to make sure that what you're getting out is accurate and also challenge it, right? And test it and make sure that it's what you needed. That's probably a little long-winded way of how I got to where I am today, but I think it's definitely a skill that continues to be refined because just like AI today is changing every day, so are the skill sets needed to ensure that you're leveraging in the right way will need to evolve.
So interesting take. And so, Michael, if we follow what Janiell's saying, you still have to read everything, right? The regulation comes out, the guidance comes out, the rule comes out. You still have to read it, even if you're going to ask whatever it might be, ChatGPT, Grok, whoever, Gemini, to provide you with an analysis.
Yeah, the way that AI works, we all know with things like ChatGPT, these models, you have to put in a certain prompt, and depending on that prompt, you get a result. The problem is that you can put in a hundred different prompt or 100 of the same prompt, and it's going to give you 100 different responses. So that becomes a challenge. You want to be well versed in the regulation because you want to feed ChatGPT or whatever model you're using as much information as you can, so then you can get the most holistic answer and leverage it, like Janiell was saying, for whatever the objective might be. But yeah, I think AI has taken everything by storm. We see it in almost every industry. I think it's pretty surprising to me how sophisticated it gets every single day. So I'm excited to see what's coming in the future. I do view it as a tool. I agree that the human element is always going to be critical. You can't just trust it to do everything for you. But I think it'll save a lot of time, energy, and resources going forward.
No, and I think that's a key point that you're both making. You still have to have the knowledge. If you don't have the knowledge to begin with, then that's a major skill set that you don't have. Because, as you said, you can't rely on it. And if you're not able to catch where its deficiency is, you're going to fail. And you're going to fail your client and you're going to fail your employer. And we know that's not a good result. So still have to train, we still have to read, we still have to understand, and we still have to stay up to date. And that's an important point. So other than AI, what other important skills are there that you would recommend to our audience, particularly our young professionals, that they should acquire? Because we're talking not just to people in your situation that are in the workforce and have been in the workforce for a few years, but we're talking to people that might be still in university, finishing up. Is there some other program I should take if this is the area that I want to make my career in. So, Janiell, what would you tell them? What advice would you give them as to what they should continue studying or working on to be prepared for the future?
Well, number one, I think you're always studying and preparing, right? Like that should never change. I think there's always ways to improve each and every year, day, month. Like there's room for growth at any point. I think one of the things that I've been particularly focused on recently, and I think is critical for a compliance professional, is to communicate clearly to senior executives, boards, regulators. Effective communication and being able to articulate with clarity and persuasion the risks that you've identified and the, let's say, for example, controls that you're proposing or otherwise, I think is a critical skill set, and will actually dictate whether or not or how quickly you move up, quote unquote, in the ranks, right? Somebody who cannot articulate and communicate effectively will likely not be able to rise up to the rank of a chief compliance officer, who then has to convince boards and senior management on particular controls that for that board member or maybe senior executive will mean either I have to pay more money for this new tool on compliance, or I'm going to make less money because now I have to do all this KYC, and maybe a customer's not going to want the product anymore. It becomes a little bit more trickier to have a customer acquisition journey because now I have to ask for an ID because my chief compliance officer said so. But if you can't articulate the risk underlying that control, then the likelihood is you're not going to get the buy-in at your senior executive level. So I think that's a critical skill set.
That is, I can't even tell you, great point, doesn't go far enough. Social skills, let's call them, are so significant. I cannot tell you how many times I've come across younger people and they don't look you in the eye. They look away. They hesitate, to shake hands. They're timid in a sense. I raised a daughter who's going to be 30 now. I still can't believe that. And one of the comments that I received from the time she was very young from people was, wow, she shook my hand. She put her hand out. She shook my hand. She looked me in the eye, told me her name. And it's just such an important, and it is a skill now. In the past, you wouldn't think that was a skill. And I think with generations, that has changed. I'll be honest, I was afraid of that. Like you, I went to law school, and there's a part of law school between your second and third year that's called moot court. And moot court is basically a mock trial where you're given one side or the other, and you prepare and you have to go in and argue in this moot court. I was petrified. The good news was I was on the law school basketball team. When my class was doing moot court, I was playing in a tournament out of town. And I said, oh, I missed it. And then third year, just before graduation, I was called to the dean's office. You did not do moot court. And moot court is a requirement to graduate. I said, well, my class already did it. It's not my fault. I mean, you sent me to Springfield, Massachusetts to play in a basketball tournament. So they said, well, I guess we'll just have to waive it because there's no time left for you to take it. You can see by Janiell's expression, it's like, how in the world can you graduate law school and not do it? Because by not birth, but by I don't know what, always been an introvert. Would go somewhere, I'd be the guy sitting on the couch in the corner not talking to anybody. And now here I am, podcasts, I have to run conferences, events, webinars, etc. And it's a skill I had to acquire, and it was extremely important, obviously, for my advancement. So Michael, I don't see you having that issue, but what would you recommend to, the younger people out there? How do you develop that skill?
It's a great question. I'm naturally introverted as well, I think. It's just if I can give you advice, it's just do it. Just, it's always nice to be kind to people. You feel better, they feel better. It's a better experience for you. You want to come off as an experienced professional. These soft skills, they take you so much further than you might think. They're extremely important, as David was saying. It means a lot to go ahead and introduce yourself, to be able to have a conversation, to be able to present yourself to a room. It's a huge skill set. So I would definitely amplify that message.
Agreed. The only thing you have to fear is fear itself, as has been said, and it is definitely a question of overcoming a fear. So, Janiell, you've mentioned a couple of tools that are out there. What are, just if you could name a few that maybe you've used or that you haven't used but you've heard about, and you've talked about trust but verify, because the other questions are, and I'll get this one with Michael, who's dealing directly with, I think, banks probably in this area, confidentiality concerns, right? Because the information goes into these platforms. Is it safe? Where is it going? And you, as a lawyer, know very well how important confidentiality is. So, what are some of those tools, maybe that you're using, you have used, and how confident do you feel about the issue of safety of information?
So some of the tools that I use is obviously ChatGPT, but the firm also has a kind of what they call like an offline version of ChatGPT, which is called ChatGT, and that one is completely offline. It's not connected to the internet. It's not generative. So there's no using the existing kind of input of users for purposes of developing and increasing the AI's capabilities. So from a confidentiality perspective, I would never use any sort of publicly available AI tool for client confidential information, because whatever you put in is being used on the back end. And in fact, I think there is like a licensing agreement where you're basically saying anything you're putting in is not subject to confidentiality. There was also just recently a Supreme Court ruling that privilege will be essentially broken if you're feeding in information, or confidentiality will be broken as well if you're feeding information through these AI tools. So to the extent that a client is looking at an issue and expects that the issue be confidential, don't use that public AI tool, because there's no privilege, there's no confidentiality. So you're basically unprotected. And so what the result of that is that a lot of companies will likely now start using their law firms, such as, GT, to be able to leverage AI in a manner that will maintain the confidentiality and privilege of that information. So I guess it increases, to my earlier point, the expectation that law firms are leveraging these tools in a manner that is consistent with the client's outcome, which is I want to maintain privilege. So it's a very critical component of the use. Those individuals that are using it on a public forum need to be absolutely careful that they're not putting in confidential information, because once that's in there, it's no longer confidential.
No, great point, and a tricky one to be aware of. Michael, looking at it from a different way. So, you're providing advisory services to financial institutions. Your firm also provides external audit services to those same institutions. And I have heard, because firms like yours are now starting to use innovative technology in the advisory, in the audit, are your clients concerned or expressing concern that perhaps you're going to see something that they didn't see? And that type of discovery is, of course, open to examiners when they come into that financial institution, who will say, "Oh, interesting. Uh, how did you miss this?" So, thoughts on that?
It's a great question. I think, whenever there's potential for things to go wrong, there's always going to be some concern. I haven't heard that particular concern vocalized to me, but I'm sure, most people think it. I think if you're going to implement something like this into your organization, you have to make sure that cybersecurity is at the very forefront, making sure that, there's a closed loop, that all the information is not going to make it to the open source internet. You're not putting in sensitive information in there related to clients, phone numbers, account numbers, things like that. You want to make sure that it's protected. Um, but yeah, I mean, we are implementing it. We're seeing it across different financial institutions. They're starting to use it too. So I think it's one of those things that we're not afraid of it. We're welcoming it into our industry, and we're using it as a tool, just responsibly and as safely as we can.
So, Janiell, lawyer means a lot of education, law school, etc. But what types of, shall we say, outside additional education have you followed? You know, you went through all it, you learned how to be a lawyer, you learned how to interpret rules, regulation, laws, how to analyze them, how to explain them to clients. But now that we're talking about AI, innovation, now, are there any courses, certifications, anything that you might have taken that helped you along to understand this?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, the Florida Bar has continuing legal education courses that we're required to do on a ongoing basis anyway, that are in particular in relation to AI, ethical use of AI, confidentiality concerns, and also with respect to how to best leverage it, right? When to use it, when not to use it, when is it okay, when is it not? And then the issue about prompts, right? And how to tailor the prompt to ensure that you're getting the most or the most efficient outcome, right? Or the outcome that you're looking for, the response that you're looking for. So there's actually a lot more tools than I could have ever imagined, or educational courses that I would have ever imagined today with respect to AI in particular. Another avenue for me is podcasts. I mean, I love listening to a good podcast as I'm, on the way to work or, doing errands, etc. Doing my walks. I do 10K steps a day. So when I'm walking, I like to hear a podcast on whatever, particular issue. But in respect to AI, I think there's a ton of podcasts now on AI in particular, and even just regulatory legal trends. I have a ton of them that I listen to that are related to payments regulatory work, bank fintech partnerships. So that's another thing that I leverage. So it would be CLEs, podcasts, and then I think that would be it, really. Trying to think of any others, but nothing else is coming to mind. I mean, you could take an educational course, like if you maybe I think like schools are now offering courses in particular, like in relation to AI. So if you're in school, in college, etc., you may want to look for those types of courses that can fine tune the skill set for working with AI.
So, Michael, Janiell has the bar. So she has that advantage that they are constantly putting out courses. I see them because my wife maintains her bar membership. And so every 2 years, I believe it is, you have to have your 30 or 40 CLEs. And
Yeah.
broken down now, technology is now a component, and professional responsibility. And I heard that, with relation to AI. So in your case, what is your source, shall we say, of this type of continuing education?
Well, I'm fortunate that at Kaufman Rossin, we also have a mandate to complete a certain amount of CLE credits throughout the year. So we do have ongoing education programs that we're routinely watching. I would just add to Janiell's point, in addition to the podcast, I like to reach out to my peers as well. I think AI is something that's evolving every single day. It's something that we're all learning. So I'm not afraid to ask questions. I know certain team members on the team, they deal with AI in a lot more technical aspect than I do. They're really behind the scenes, seeing how it works. So I'm not afraid to reach out to them and see, what insight I can gain from them.
No, and a very good point. Networking is always important. As a matter of fact, just a shameless plug. So next week we have a roundtable that we will be hosting, and so far it's going to be very well attended to discuss all of these different issues that are now coming up and how everybody is facing them. Exams, for example, not everybody's faced an exam under the new exam regime, but some have, and it's great to have that exchange of information and to learn from others because they're experiencing similar, if not the same things that you are. Okay, so let's close this out with one of those fantastic questions that you hear maybe sometimes in job interviews, etc. No, it's not going to be the one. If you could be a tree, what kind of tree would you be? Or anything like that. But how about this one? If you had the opportunity to go back and speak to your younger self, who's getting ready to make their way, thinking about the career path, but in today's world, right? In today's environment, what would you tell them? What kind of advice would you give them for entering? And we can keep it focused to the legal regulatory compliance space. What would you tell them, Janiell?
Oh, that's a good question. If I would have been able to seek out courses that were more focused in the financial services industry, I probably would have taken those back in when I was in college. I don't think they had them, but they have them today. So yeah. Um, but I think I probably could have maybe even prompted that discussion, in particular at FIU, for example, hey, why don't we have classes on, banking and financial technology companies, et cetera? Because it was not, I guess it wasn't as prevalent, but I think it was still something that, and back in 18, 2019, when I started law school, it was still a topic. So I guess I could have, told my younger self to maybe prompt that discussion with the college, the people, and maybe like the professors I had, or otherwise, like, hey, why don't we have these sorts of classes, and maybe we can start that up. Or even anything related to compliance. I don't think I ever saw that, which I think was a huge oversight, to be honest.
No, and that's correct. When I was in law school many years ago, what pointed me in this direction is there was one class related to banking and finance, and it wasn't even compliance. Compliance didn't exist. There was no
Right.
such thing as compliance. Compliance really didn't come about until after 9/11 as a profession. Um, so yes, today, fortunately, that has improved. FIU that you mentioned does have a couple of curricula, one in the business school and one in the law school, where you can follow that career path. Um, or you come to people like FIBA, where we also have those types of courses that can help people along that path. And in fact, more and more, we are working with students, particularly at FIU, that are interested in that path. So, Michael, what would you tell your younger self that would help them perhaps and help them, particularly with an eye towards the future, let's say 2030 and beyond?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would definitely say don't neglect the technical side. You know, try to learn as much as you can, learn about APIs, cloud platforms, how, how to prompt, how to, just welcome it because AI is something that's here. It's not going away. So just embrace it. Embrace it, learn as much as you can. You're going to see clients using it. I think it's only going to keep evolving over time and it's something that's just going to stick around. So don't neglect, the technical side of things.
No, and I I couldn't give my younger self that advice because I was very fortunate. I had a very, very, very intelligent mother growing up who was the one who made me use and learn how to use that Apple IIc computer. And she said, just like you were saying, this is the future. You need to learn this skill set. If you don't, you're going to fail. You won't be able to make it in the world. And I think that's the best piece of advice that we can give our younger selves or that we can give anybody. Knowledge is power. The more you know, the more you understand, and the more diverse that your background is, the more important that's going to be. So, Janiell, Michael, thank you. It's been interesting. I think I look at the two of you and I feel a little bit better about the future. I think it's in good hands, and I think you'll be giving very good advice to people going forward in the future. Thank you all for listening, and stay tuned for future podcasts.